Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Today we are diving into something pretty cool in the world of LLMs.
Large language models.
LLMs, you got it. These large language models have a weird tendency to focus a lot of their attention.
Like a lot.
Yeah, a lot of attention on that first little piece of information.
The first token.
Yeah, that first token in a sequence. And it's something that people have called like an attention sink.
Yeah, like it just sucks all the attention.
Yeah. Now, you've probably heard about this before, and you've maybe seen some cool tricks to work around it or even use it to your advantage.
Yeah, people have found some really interesting ways to exploit this behavior.
But today, we're going to take a step back and ask, like, the fundamental question, why?
Why is this happening?
Like, why do these models even learn to do this in the first place? Is this a bug or a feature?
Right. If you think about how attention works in transformers, the idea is that different parts of a sequence should be interacting and influencing each other.
Right.
So it does seem a bit odd that so much focus would end up on just that first token.
It's like counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, it almost feels like a quirk of the architecture.
Yeah, like maybe it's just an accident.
Right.
But some new research, specifically this paper we've been looking at called Why Do LLMs Attend to the First Token?
By Federico Barbero and colleagues.
Yeah, Federico Barbero et al. It suggests that this isn't a quirk at all.
It's actually a feature.
It's a feature. Like, It's a learned behavior. There's a reason for it.
Exactly.
So our mission today is to understand what that reason is.
Yeah. We're going to break down the arguments in this paper and really try to get to the bottom of this attention sink phenomenon.
And for you, especially if you're, someone who's interested in the world of AI and machine learning.
Yeah. If you're learning about these things.
This deep dive is really going to give you, I think, a more fundamental understanding.
Yeah, like a deeper intuition.
Of why transformers do this.
And not just that it happens, but why it's important.
Okay, so let's jump right in. The central idea of this paper is that these attention sinks, especially the one at the very beginning of a sequence, are a way for LLMs to avoid what they call overmixing of information between all the different tokens.
Okay, so we have all these tokens in our sequence, and the model's trying to understand them.
Right.
But if the information from all these tokens starts to blend together too much,
yeah,
you can lose some important distinctions.
It's like if you took like all the different spices you had in your kitchen and you just like threw them in a blender and hit puree.
Right, and blended them all up.
Right, and you just kept blending them and blending them and blending them.
Eventually, you just have this generic brown powder.
You wouldn't be able to tell what was originally in there.
Exactly. And in the world of LLMs, this overmixing can cause some real problems.
Okay, like what?
Well, one problem is something called rank collapse.
Rank collapse, okay.
Now imagine all the different ways a word can be used in language.
Right, like bank could be a river bank or a financial institution.
Exactly. Each of those meanings has its own subtle nuances, and LLMs need to be able to capture those nuances.
To really understand what's going on.
But with rank collapse, what happens is that the model starts to represent all these different meanings in a much smaller, less diverse space.
So instead of having like a whole spectrum of representations for the word bank,
right,
it gets kind of squished down to just a few.
Yeah, and you lose a lot of the richness and expressiveness.
Okay, so it's like taking a really detailed high-resolution photo and compressing it down to a blurry, low-resolution thumbnail.
Exactly. The paper actually cites some other research on this by Dong et al. In 2021 and Wu et al. In 2024.
Oh, wow. So this is a well-known problem.
Yeah, it's a known issue with attention mechanisms.
So that's rank collapse.
Now, another related issue is representational collapse.
Okay, so this is a different type of collapse.
This one is specifically about long sequences.
Okay, so when you have like a really long document or a long conversation.
Right. What can happen is that the representations of the tokens that appear later in the sequence,
so the words that come later,
they start to become very similar to the representations of the tokens that appeared much earlier.
So they kind of forget everything that happened in between?
In a way, yeah. They lose that unique information that they should have gained from their specific context.
It's like if you were reading a really long book and by the end you could only remember the first chapter.
Right, you've lost the thread of the story.
You've lost all those details and character developments and plot twists that happened in the middle.
Exactly. And this representational collapse, again, makes it hard for the model to really understand the meaning of the whole sequence.
So we've got rank collapse and representational collapse.
And then there's oversquashing.
Oversquashing? Okay, tell me about that one.
This one has to do with the way that information flows through a decoder-only transformer.
Which is what most of these large language models are based on.
Right. So because of how these models are structured, earlier tokens in the sequence can have a disproportionately large influence on later tokens.
So it's like the early birds get all the worms?
Kind of, yeah. It's like the beginning of the sequence has this really loud voice, and it can drown out the signal coming from the later parts of the sequence.
So it's not that the model forgets the later information, it's that it gets kind of overwhelmed by the earlier information.
Exactly. And again, this can make it hard for the model to properly interpret the meaning of the whole sequence.
Okay, so we have all these potential problems with information getting mixed up or distorted in these LLMs.
Rank collapse, representational collapse, over squashing.
Yeah. So how do these attention sinks actually help? Like, what's the mechanism here?
Okay. So remember that these attention sinks often happen at that very first token.
Right. Usually the Bose token, the beginning of sequence token.
Exactly. Now, the key idea here is that this first token acts as a kind of information sponge.
Just a buffer?
Yeah, a buffer, a sponge, whatever analogy works for you.
Okay. I like sponge.
So by attracting a lot of attention to itself.
It's like it's soaking up all that attention.
Right. It's actually drawing attention away from all the other tokens in the sequence.
So instead of all the tokens interacting with each other super intensely,
right,
they're kind of focusing on this one point.
Exactly. And this actually slows down the rate in which information mixes across the sequence.
So it's like putting a governor on the system.
Yeah, it's like a control mechanism.
Okay, so the attention sink is regulating the flow of information.
And preventing it from getting too jumbled up too quickly.
And the paper actually shows this visually in figure 1.
Right. They do this really cool experiment where they make a small change to one of the tokens.
Like they tweak one of the words.
Yeah, and then they see how that change spreads through the model.
And what happens?
Well, when there isn't an attention sink present, that change spreads like wildfire.
It just ripples through the whole network.
But when there is an attention sink, that spread is much more contained.
Because the sink kind of absorbs some of that change?
Exactly. It's like having a designated area to handle those fluctuations.
Okay, so the sink helps to stabilize the information flow.
And they also saw this really dramatic effect in that huge Llama 405B model.
Oh yeah, they found that almost 80% of the attention in a typical prompt was focused on that first boss token.
It's crazy, right?
That's like almost all of the model's attention is going to this one tiny piece of information.
It just shows how powerful this mechanism is.
Okay, so we see this effect in action, but why does it work from a mathematical perspective?
Right, so the paper gets into some of the nitty-gritty math here, and they talk about something called the Jacobian matrix.
Okay, now I'm not a math whiz, so can you explain that in simple terms?
Of course. In this context, the Jacobian matrix is basically a way to measure how much the representation of one token.
Like the internal understanding of one word?
Right, how much that representation is affected by a small change in another token.
So it's like sensitivity measure.
Exactly. And the norm of this Jacobian basically tells you the overall strength of this sensitivity.
So a high norm means that tokens are very sensitive to each other.
Right, and a low norm means they're less sensitive.
Okay, so what do attention sinks have to do with this Jacobian matrix?
Well, the paper shows that attention sinks actually help to control the norm of the Jacobian.
So they're regulating the sensitivity.
Right. By having a strong attention sink, you can prevent a small change in one token from causing huge changes in the representations of all the other tokens.
It's like the sink is damping down those ripples of change.
Exactly. And this is important because if those ripples are too big, it can destabilize the whole network.
And lead to those problems we talked about earlier, like rank collapse and representational collapse.
Right. Theorem 3.2 in the paper gives you the formal math behind this. But the key takeaway is that attention sinks help to maintain stability.
Okay. I'll trust you on the math.
No problem.
Yeah.
But to really see this in action, they did some experiments on the Gemma 7b model.
And they call this a perturbation analysis.
Right. So they take a sequence of text and they make a tiny change to one of the tokens.
Like they change a word to a synonym or something.
Maybe subtle.
And then they see how that change propagates through the model.
Exactly. And they do this both with and without the attention sink at the boss token.
And figure 2 shows the results, right?
Yes. What they find is that when the boss token is there, that change is much more contained.
It doesn't spread as far or as intensely.
But when you remove the boss token, that change just explodes.
It ripples through the whole network.
Exactly. So this really provides strong empirical evidence that these sinks are actually doing what the math predicts.
They're stabilizing the token representations.
And they also looked at the attention maps themselves.
Which are basically visualizations of how much attention each token is paying to each other token.
Right. And what they found in figure 3 is that when the boss token is present, The attention maps are more focused.
More structured.
But when you remove the boss token, the attention maps get much smoother.
Smoother meaning?
It means that the tokens are attending to each other in a more uniform way.
So there's less distinction between which tokens are important.
Right, and this suggests that there's more mixing going on.
Because without that sync to focus on the tokens are all paying more attention to each other.
And that leads to more blending of information.
It's like the sync is acting as a focal point that prevents everything from getting too entangled.
Exactly. Now here's another really interesting finding.
Hit me with it.
They found that some attention heads actually seem to use the boss token to implement what they call an approximate no-op.
A no-op? What does that even mean?
No-op stands for no operation.
So it's like doing nothing.
Basically, yeah. So they observed this one attention head in Gemma 7b that was mostly attending to the boss token.
Okay.
But it would only become active when it saw a specific trigger.
Like what kind of trigger?
In this case, it was an apostrophe.
Okay, so if the previous token was an apostrophe, this attention head would suddenly wake up.
Right. And what's interesting is that the value vector associated with the boss token, which is basically a transformed representation of the token, has a very low norm.
A low norm meaning?
It means it's close to zero.
Okay.
So when an attention head is heavily focused on a token with a low norm value vector,
it's like multiplying by zero.
Yeah. The output of that attention head is also going to be very small.
So it's basically doing nothing.
It's passing information through with minimal changes.
It's like it's on standby until it sees its trigger.
Exactly. And this directly relates back to the idea of avoiding overmixing.
Because it's not constantly churning the information.
It's only doing so when it has a specific reason to.
That's a really clever strategy.
It's like the model has learned to be efficient with its attention.
Okay, so we've seen how these attention sinks work and why they're beneficial.
But there's one more important question.
Shoot.
Does the length of the context that the model is processing affect the strength of the attention sink?
So like if you're feeding the model a really long document versus a short sentence?
Exactly. And to test this, they trained models on different context lengths.
And what did they find?
Well, Figure 5 shows the results really nicely.
I'm looking at it now.
And you can see that the models trained on longer contexts had much stronger attention sinks.
So the longer the context, the more the model relied on that sink.
Exactly. And this makes sense if you think about it.
Because with a longer context, there's more opportunity for that overmixing to happen.
So the model needs a stronger mechanism to prevent it.
And that stronger mechanism is a stronger attention sink.
Exactly. Now, they also looked at the effect of model size.
So how many parameters the model has?
Right. And they used the Llama 3 family of models for this.
Which has versions with 8 billion, 70 billion, and 405 billion parameters.
A huge range.
And Table 1 and Figure 6 show what they found.
And the trend is clear. Larger models tend to have a higher proportion of attention heads that form these strong sinks.
So as models get bigger and more complex, they rely more on this mechanism.
It seems that way.
Which makes sense because larger models are probably even more prone to overmixing.
Right, because they have more connections and more layers.
So the attention sink becomes even more important for maintaining stability.
Exactly. Now there's one last big question that the paper tackles.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat.
Is there something special about that boss token itself?
Or would the sink just form at the first token regardless of what it is?
Right, like is it the position that matters or the token itself?
To answer this, they did a bunch of experiments with different pre-training strategies.
They tried training models with and without the boss token.
And they also varied whether the boss token was always at the beginning of the sequence or not.
And the results are summarized in Table 2.
Okay, let's break it down.
So if you train a model with the boss token always at the beginning,
and then you remove it during inference,
the attention sink disappears.
And the model's performance actually suffers.
So it seems like the model has learned to associate the boss token with that sinking behavior.
Okay.
But here's the really interesting part.
I'm ready.
If you train a model without using the boss token at all,
so it never sees that token during training,
an attention sink still forms.
But on a different token.
No, it still forms at the first token of the sequence.
So it's not about the specific token, it's about the position.
Exactly. That first position seems to be crucial for establishing this mechanism that prevents overmixing.
So the model learns that something needs to be there at the beginning to absorb all that attention.
Right. And the pre-training strategy just influences what that something is.
So if it sees a boss token there, it'll use that.
But if not, it'll just grab whatever token happens to be in that first position.
And use that as the sink.
Exactly. So it's really the position that's important for this mechanism to develop.
Okay, so to sum it all up, it seems like these attention sinks aren't just some random quirk of LLMs.
They're a learned and essential behavior.
A way for these models to manage the flow of information.
And prevent harmful overmixing.
Which could lead to all sorts of problems.
Rank collapse, representational collapse, oversquashing.
Yeah, the full 9 yards.
And this is especially important for larger models and longer contexts.
Where the risk of overmixing is even greater.
Exactly. And what's really cool is that this simple phenomenon of focusing attention on the first token connects to all these deeper theoretical concepts about how information flows through these networks.
It's like a window into the inner workings of these models.
And it also highlights how the choices we make during pre-training,
like the length of the context and the types of tokens we use,
can have a big impact on how these models behave.
So for all you AI enthusiasts out there who are trying to understand these systems,
this is really important.
Yeah, this is the foundation.
Now, this research also raises some interesting questions about other areas of machine learning.
And even beyond.
Like, could this idea of controlled information flow with a dedicated point for regulating mixing be applied to other types of models?
Or even to biological systems.
It's a fascinating thought.
Like maybe our brains have something similar going on.
It's definitely something to ponder.
So we hope this deep dive has given you a new appreciation for these attention sinks.
And a deeper understanding of why LLMs do what they do.
Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.